Okay. All right, I'm recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from this, my little nutshell of infinite space, my television studio apartment right here in the wood of the holly under this sign in the little creative corner known as Crotona. Anyway, today, folks, I have an incredibly special guest who has come through a gauntlet that is really incredible in all its aspect. He is an officer and a gentleman and also a flight instructor. He's a part-time politician, a father, graduate of the Citadel in South Carolina. He's a proud citizen of the South. He is my esteemed guest. And just a few weeks ago, he participated in what could easily be the largest human airlift in history. Talk about Exodus, talk about Noah's flood. What happened a month ago in Afghanistan ranks right up there. Hastily organized though it may have been, this mission of mercy into the northern heartland of Central Asia, they evacuated over 100,000 people in just over 3 weeks. He's recently back from Afghanistan. He's here with me today. Welcome, Ed Sutton, to Rebel Without Applause. How are you? Great seeing you here.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for having me on again. And yeah, it's an honor to be joining you from the opposite coast. And really thankful for our chance encounter a little over 2 years ago. And the fact that we've been able to stay in contact ever since is always an honor and pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, likewise. I'll tell people. So this is during the South Carolina political primary. I'm there capturing as much audio as I can for my little podcast. And I went to see Tom Steyer, who was, he was sort of, in the running there in the primary. It was his last hurrah. And I'm out somewhere, I guess, just outside of South Carolina. I see this handsome young man come up and introduce the candidate. And he himself was running for a local office there in the state assembly. And I was impressed. I took note. I watched Tom Steyer, a very pleasing, affable, intelligent billionaire. He was the good billionaire, I think, in the political contest. And then the next morning, I went to the Citadel to see the current Secretary of Transportation, none other than, tell me his name. I'm blanking right now. He's
Pete Buttigieg.
Pete Buttigieg, of course. He was probably, to me, I thought, the most impressive natural politician of all the politicians I saw there. And sure enough, the same handsome guy gets up in the Citadel and introduces Pete Buttigieg, who that was pretty much the last day of his campaign because he lost. And I think he folded his tent shortly afterwards. And then we got to talk and I said, hey, who the hell are you for, pal? Tom Steyer or Pete Buttigieg? Make up your mind. And we started talking and you kindly did a podcast. So I never forgot that day and it was really fun. Yeah, I mean, I was curious.
Yeah, we hit some random stuff. We veered off into 1914 political alliances and politics, and a broad range of topics that were following the umbrella of random, which I very much enjoy those conversations.
Oh yeah, I was so impressed because you knew about Sykes-Picot, which was the treaty that basically. The treaty, but I guess there were two foreign service officers who basically drew up the map of what is still today the Middle East. So, I was so impressed that you had a deep feeling for history, because I just feel like the past is the present at all times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, having been to the Citadel, so that is a military academy. I think Pat Conroy wrote about it. There was a great movie that was sort of based loosely on the Citadel experience called End as a Man that my acting teacher directed, Jack Garfine, about some of the hazing and brutality of military academies. I don't know if you experienced that when you were a student at the Citadel.
So we have an official saying or unofficial saying at the Citadel that hazing is a myth. So it is a bit, I graduated from there in 2006. So it's a bit different school from when I first came in, arrived there in 2002. And I'll say a lot for good. But they definitely make sure, especially that first semester, make sure you want to be there. The folks that, didn't come maybe because, they had a father or something like that attended, or, they didn't, for whatever reason, they just, didn't fully appreciate the experience. They certainly got weeded out pretty quick. But we have certainly, I mean, still a school of high standards, but I think since my time, we've shifted to a bigger focus on academics, because after all, we are a college. That is certainly something that's important. But I do have a lot of fond memories, and Pat Conroy is a graduate of the school, and for a while he was on the outs when he released the Lords of Discipline. I believe it was in the 80s.
Right.
The school did not appreciate that characterization, but I'll say it's largely accurate. So he was on the outs for about a decade, and then slowly as his success continued to build, and administrations changed, they decided that Pat Conroy is one of the good ones, and certainly alumni that we want to highlight. And I got to meet him in 2004, I believe it was. It was right when he released My Losing Season, and he was on campus to sign some copies and talk about his book. So actually, Bill, believe it or not, I was in the same spot that you and I chatted. It was right there in the lobby of the Alumni Center where I got to hang out with Pat Conroy and talk with him for a little bit.
And didn't he write The Great Santini?
He did. That was about his father and having a difficult relationship with his father, and a man, not unlike what you mentioned with your dad, just struggling on the backside of his military career, trying to piece it all together.
Yeah, that was a great movie. And Beaufort was the location, and I went there and I go, God, I want to come back here and rent a house and just go fishing every day. It seems like a really cool hang. I love the water, paddleboarding, fishing.
I'm a big fan of Beaufort, and it's great down there. It's a good getaway, and it's slower than Charleston. Charleston, we've picked up the pace since we've become popular, but Beaufort's done a really good job of maintaining that kind of quaint character.
So your family is not from the South, though. You're from Chicago. Were you born in Chicago?
Born there, yeah. We're primarily from the South. My mom, North Carolina, dad, a little bit all over, but have been here since the 90s, in South Carolina since the 90s. So certainly consider this home. And usually when I drop that out, people are, oh yeah, I was actually born in Chicago. A lot of people are like, wait a second, I thought you were always from South Carolina. But yeah, I haven't been born up there, but my parents moved away when I was.
And what made you want to go to the Citadel?
It was a factor. It was a number of reasons. Probably the biggest is 9/11 happened my senior year in high school. And, the way I saw that was, that was my generation's, call to service, not unlike Pearl Harbor for our grandparents' generation, that, this is our time to, raise our right hand and, swear to defend the Constitution and do something, because obviously our country was in an hour of need. And, being, living in South Carolina, knowing that, the Citadel had the reputation that it did, it was a great path to active duty military service. Is really honestly the only school I applied to. So I found out later my mom, without my permission, applied to South Carolina. I got in there too, but me personally, I put in for the Citadel. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. Kind of veered off topic. So I went down there as a senior, I think the summer before, or let me see, it was after September 11th, went down for my, interview, whatever visit. And had a good interview with school. And that afternoon, they said, hey, your grades look good. You're somebody we want to have here. We'll offer early acceptance for this, upcoming year and everything. And I'm sitting there with my parents, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. What's the catch? They're like, oh, it's just an extra, $450 fee, knowing that I was going to, pay for all of my education costs and everything like that. And I said right there, I was like, oh, that's good. I'll just wait to the regular acceptance roll around and put in my application then. And my parents almost lost it. Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you taking early acceptance for the offer to you? And I, very logically said, hey, if they're going to accept me early, they're going to accept me in the normal process. And I saved myself $450. So,
right. Well, what you said is very interesting, because you are a child of this generation. I'm older than you. I kind of came of age. I graduated high school, or no, my freshman year of college was 1975 at UC Berkeley with the end of the Vietnam War. And so the 10 years of from 8 years old to 18, I grew up with the Vietnam War on television. I did not realize until sometime later how drenched in violence my actual youth was, even though I lived in the comfortable confines of suburban Southern California. But your generation, you went to high school You were in high school around 9/11 in 2001, and then you were amongst the last of Americans to close the chapter on this whole military adventure. What were your feelings, or if any, while that was going on, as you were, vacating Afghanistan behind the windshield of a C-17?
Yes, it's you brought up a good point. It's particularly in my life and the men and women in my generation that have served is really come full circle from the time the planes hit the towers to a couple months later, going into Afghanistan to now. We just had the 20th anniversary of September 11th, and now being fully out of there. And still processing. I'll be honest. Usually I'll have some kind of post or put out something on September 11th, because it is a monumental day. Decided where I was going to go to school and what I was going to do for my service. But this year, I'll be honest, I really didn't feel like writing anything, because it's it is still a bit raw. Nobody in the military or the U.S. wanted to see the Taliban in charge again. Certainly, not unsurprising given how things have been, for the last couple of years, but not the outcome that we were hoping for, sacrifice for, or anything along those lines. So it's a lot to process, and it's not directly in parallel with Vietnam, but there are certainly a lot of similarities there to highlight. And I'm fortunate; I've got a couple of Vietnam veteran friends that have reached out and offered support and stuff, and saying basically, hey man, we went through the same thing. We put our best years of our life into this effort to come up short. So that is something I think a lot of us are still dealing with. I had a friend reach out last week, personal conversation to ask how I was doing and questions about everything that's happened over the last month or month plus so. And they said, hey, I'm nervous. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to ask and stuff. And I'll say every veteran processes information and experience differently. Myself personally, I'm open to talk about stuff, because I think it is important that veterans talk about their experience. So hopefully some electric leaders are listening and can relate, and also when they need solid advice, reach out to the people that they know have this experience, but also talk about the issues that are important to us. And two that I'll hit real quick is burn pits are kind of like the Agent Orange in my generation. A lot of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are starting to experience respiratory issues in their 30s, which is way too young for that, and it's a direct result of burn pits and the lack of environmental health controls that in a war zone that were allowed burn pits to be utilized for 2 decades. And then on the women's front, we have more women veterans serving than any other time in history, which is absolutely incredible. But we know that the military, especially the medical system and the VA system, is largely built around our traditional male veterans. So it is an issue. You look up online to see folks talking about it, but particularly with my sisters in arms have talked about it, is going to the VA is like stepping into a slightly different culture that hasn't fully pivoted to provide care for health care for women. So that's a conversation I think needs more attention. That the makeup of our service looks different than it did a generation ago, and our sisters in arms, we've got to be able to take care of them the same way that we do with guys.
Now, I can't help but see the poster behind you off your right shoulder there. Make art, not war. And hopefully there'll be some art that will come out of this war, at least some creative expressiveness for you. I think I mentioned this to you briefly. I've just, in anticipation of talking to you, I kind of wanted to just do a deep dive into the history of Afghanistan in a short way. And I was reading Winston Churchill's accounts of his tenure in Afghanistan as a young 21-year-old, I guess, lieutenant. And he wrote a book. It was written in 1897. It's called The Story of the Malakand Field Force. And he talks about the tribal struggles and distant hills and passes on the Indian frontier, which at that time, of course, India was part of the British Empire, and Afghanistan was considered the Indian frontier. And it was all part of this great geopolitical great game. And the British were very concerned about its northern flank facing its other imperial rival, Russia. But as I read and I'm reading these accounts by a young Winston Churchill, who later came, of course, to dominate the 20th century, it sounds eerily familiar to the accounts I've read, scuffling with, very passionate Islamic tribes in the hilly hinterlands of Afghanistan. It's like, I don't know, it's just like we can't escape history. And of course, the British fought 3 wars there. The Soviet Empire stumbled on its southern flank, which was Afghanistan. And then this third iteration, the US Empire, we had our trial by fire there. So all I can feel is just the long arc of history, rather than the memory, the calamity of the moment. I don't know what your feelings are, because I know you're a student of history and all these things, and you've been there. I haven't. I'm just living in my own imagination.
Yeah. So we, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Is certainly
Right.
appropriate for Afghanistan, and I can't wait to read that book. I'm a huge Winston Churchill fan, and for about a 3-year period, I read The Last Lion, which is considered his best biography out there. I think it was written in the 80s. And so I did a volume a year, so because I wanted to space that out. But the first one, it does talk about not just Afghanistan, but also his adventures escaping a POW camp in South America during the Boer War. And
South Africa. South Africa.
South Africa. But it was not lost on me that in the 1890s, Winston Churchill in his 20s was in Afghanistan, and here I am over 100 years later. Now I'm in my late 30s, but at the time in my 20s, I was also, walking on the same ground that he was, and just thinking, it was like, there is a cycle that continues to repeat itself here. So to Afghanistan, one of the probably the easiest place to kind of start that question and about the long-term, different nations, trying their hand, going all the way back to Alexander the Great,
Right.
is to understand Afghanistan. The first thing you have to understand is the geography, right? There's no other place like it in the world, with all the different valleys, and in the south here in Kandahar, you have like the desert region, and backs all the way up, to a very mountainous region. In the north, and each valley truly should be considered, or for all intents and purposes, this is its own country. It's very tribal. The geography creates natural barriers to where different valleys they'll trade, but don't necessarily intermingle a ton. And what happens in Kabul, Kabul being a major city, I think they've got around, I would say 3 million. I could be off of that number, somewhere between 3 and 6 million people. So it's a pretty big city. That version of Afghanistan is very different than when you go out into the countryside and amongst all the mountains and valleys and everything. And to our most recent effort, there was some polling done. I can't remember how recent it was, but over 90% of Afghans polled didn't even know anything about September 11th, or the details surrounding that, which is pretty astonishing, and speaks to how it is. You can't paint Afghanistan with a broad brush. It is just incredibly diverse. So trying to simplify that country, you would be doing a disservice with it. But I'll give you a good example of how different valleys, how they operate, how they are. In 2013, I was deployed with the Army, the 101st Airborne Division from Band of Brothers. I was still an Air Force pilot at the time, but long story short, I volunteered for a program where they'd basically embed pilots with Army units, and I would my job in Afghanistan was to coordinate with my C-17 brothers and sisters to fly air supply in. So I was on the ground with a radio in very remote locations, and making sure that the fuel drops and the supply drops were happening without issue. And one of the areas that I got moved to for a little while was this valley called Bamiyan. Some people call it Bamiyan. There's a couple of different pronunciations, but this particular area is where the famous Buddha statues are, or used to be, that were carved many hundreds of years ago. And in 2001, prior to September 11th, when the Taliban was running the majority of the country, they came into this valley. Everybody in this valley is direct descendant of Genghis Khan, and I'll get to that in a second. And they came in and they said, hey, we're the Taliban. We're in charge now. Don't worry, we'll be all right. Because this valley was relatively progressive in the sense that they believed in women's education and equal rights and everything, which is pretty good for Afghanistan. And so what they did, so they said, okay, Taliban, you can come in, type thing. So one of the first things they did is they took the mayor of the town, they called all the people to the center square, took the mayor in the town up in a helicopter, and then pushed him out. No parachute or anything like that. It killed him in front of the entire town. So then right away they're like, okay, this is not going to be great. These guys are going to put their thumb on us and lean on us pretty heavy. So of course they did what Taliban did, and shut down all the girls' schools and confine women to home and everything. But there were still some ruins within the cutouts of the Bamiyan statues that was left, and they pulled some howitzers up there and just started using them for target practice, and they destroyed. I mean, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and just destroyed what was left of these priceless artifacts. In addition, all behind, when I was in Bamiyan, I went through all these tunnels and everything. The monks that built this pre-Genghis Khan, they had that basically they lived in these caves, and they had all their temples in these caves. It was a pretty elaborate system, but I got to crawl all through there with some Kiwis, some New Zealanders that were also stationed in this valley. And they got the pictures up on Facebook, but we went in one of their temples, and it's probably about 30 feet diameter circular temple, but it was entirely black with a few places where they had kind of washed the walls a little bit, but it had all these ornate drawings, hand drawings from, again, many centuries ago of Buddha and, the story of Buddha and everything. And when the Taliban came in there, they brought tires into these temples and lit them on fire so all the smoke would black it out, because they believe you can't have any other kind of higher power in country and everything. So that's a little bit. But anyway, to the Genghis Khan connection there, when he came through the Bamiyan region, this is after the Buddhist world decline. In there, the city also, or I would say also, but they also attempted to hold out against Genghis Khan on the fortified part of the town. And they did for, I think, about 30 days or so. And then they broke through, and Genghis Khan killed absolutely everybody in the town. He's entirely wiped out the population that was there at the time. And he left 1,000 of his soldiers and their wives in that valley, and basically said, this is, more or less a colony of ours now. You guys will stay here. So when you go into Bamiyan, nowadays they look like a mixture of Mongolians and Afghans. Look entirely different from the next valley over or further down, and that's just kind of a microcosm of how the history of each little small valley and the difference, because it truly is a different nation. And when I was there in 2013, we went off base without body armor, which is very unusual. And we just took our sidearm. Again, we left our long rifles in the base, just took our sidearms. And when we could go, go to a local market. There was like a little, believe it or not, there's an internet cafe you could go to and play Battlefield 3 was out at the time. I thought that was hilarious that you could, in Afghanistan, you could play Battlefield, type at a cafe. And what they, the locals told us is like, obviously we look different. So anybody who comes in this valley that we don't know, like we run them out right away, or we take them, to the ISAF coalition partners to check them out. So they had, the locals there at the time had really good security, and again, lends itself to the terrain, but there was no, at the time, no Taliban infiltration, because they knew the Taliban would, kill their mayor again, put women back into homes and stuff. So on their own, they did a good job of policing the valley. Now, I don't know where they are now. I've been meaning to try to do some digging. Obviously, press in Afghanistan are pretty restrictive, but I do imagine that at this point they're probably under Taliban control again, which is incredibly unfortunate. But that's just kind of a little microcosm of the country as a whole, of how the different valleys have different cultures and different history and everything.
As you described that, the Aboriginal history of the Californias was similar. So each valley, there were 500 different languages apparently in California before the contact with the Spanish, each dominated by various, because California, the geography, there's all these sort of canyons, especially Northern California, kind of flowing into the Central Valley. And apparently in prehistory, each one had its own language and their own culture and their own history. So geography is very, like you say, it's destiny. So at that time, your boots are on the ground, but in the last few weeks, you were sitting in the comfort of your home in Charleston, and you got a call. And what happened?
Yeah, so at the time, previous deployment I referenced, I was still active duty at this time, but I'm in the Air Force Reserves now. Very much being a citizen airman, and I always tell my bosses emphasis on citizen, type thing, because I do have a career and involvement in politics and a number of different things on the outside, which is my primary focus these days. But I still serve and try to make it in 20 years in the Air Force Reserves. And when big events, happen around the world, we'll get a lot of times, before people get brought up on orders, it's a call for volunteers saying, hey, we've got this happening. We need volunteers. So yeah, the last few weeks have been interesting. Kind of like I mentioned before, public affairs is still keeping a tight hold on a lot of the particular details, but I am allowed to say that I participated in the Kabul lift. In total, we got about 122,000 refugees, their families, U.S. Citizens out of there, which is, you've already mentioned, it's incredible. It's I can't think of a larger humanitarian airlift that was done purely by air. Vietnam, when we were leaving Vietnam, the boat lift was a big part of that. Where Afghanistan, because it is a landlocked country, and given the only field able to operate out of, it was entirely by air. And I've got a tip a hat to right down the street from you, the Boeing engineers that and the folks in the factory at Long Beach that built this incredible aircraft. Because quite honestly, there was not a better aircraft in the world that was suited for what's occurred the last few weeks. Not just only the lift capability, but also the reliability. Because you can't pull something off like this in operation with jets that aren't reliable and tend to break down. And the C-17 just has already an incredible history. But this will certainly be one of the highlights as far as the C-17 program goes, because 130 people and roughly about 2 weeks. If you'd have told me that was possible, I probably would have said
130,000 people. 130.
Oh, sorry, 130,000. Sorry,
a factor of 1,000. Now, this is an airplane that was developed in the 80s and deployed in the 90s. It can take an Abrams tank and I guess a lot of paratroopers, but you just had people in suitcases. I'm just going to ask you basic questions and whatever you can say. First of all, I have one question. When I flew out of Charleston, I think I saw some C-17s in the airport there. And are you attached to your own plane, or they just send you to an airplane and you fly it? Like, is that my plane and they need me plus my plane? How does that work?
So back in the day, traditional, that's how it was, especially in World War II, where you see the nose art and the crew on the side. And, part of me wishes that we still did that. But like most things, the efficiency engineers, get their hands and everything and say, hey, if we do it this way, we save money, which I do appreciate, being a good steward of the tax dollar. Excuse me. But so the way it works now, basically crews and airplanes are interchangeable. So you'll have bases that have, and that's where you see on the side, hey, this plane belongs to this wing type thing. So each wing will have a certain amount of airplanes assigned, and then crews, we can fly any airplane out there. We can fly airplanes from other wings. So we're kind of totally interchangeable about whose aircraft we can fly from which wing. Kind of once you're out there in the system, they just move crews and airplanes around that makes the most sense from an efficiency standpoint.
And so you're in Charleston, you got to go. You're assigned to an airplane somewhere and off you go. I mean, the logistics of this seem very massive. I don't even know how many C-17s there are available in the United States right now. But I mean, to pull 130,000 people out of a country, I mean, that must have been just back and forth, back and forth. I don't know, where were you going? Europe, Turkey, Qatar? Like, how does that work? Like, just the logistics of this seem to me incredibly interesting. And the refueling, because what's the range on a flight like that from America? All these questions are kind of tumbling in my head. What can you share about that?
Yeah, so one of the things they want us necessarily talk about specific locations. There's, the Air Force has, I say that local office said that, but Air Force as a whole has been very clear about where folks are going and everything. So not to upset the local folks with that, I'll say you can just get on the Air Force, main Facebook page and they'll tell you exactly where folks are and whatnot. But the local office is like, oh, you can't talk about that. And I was like, okay, man. But anyway, so yeah, it is a huge logistical undertaking. It's not just, get folks out of Kabul, but you also have to have, all these, different sites that were, more or less built overnight to house people that were coming out of country, 130,000 people, that's 3 meals a day, plus latrine service. A lot of, my experience, I'll say half the folks that we were flying were children, a lot, infants and diapers included that. So, you have a lot of medical needs and associated with that. So there was a lot of that effort just beyond folks moving, but getting supplies and the medical personnel to the right location and be able to take care of the care and feeding aspect of such a humanitarian airlift. And not to say, absolutely there was, frustrations, things that certainly, people were expecting sooner and whatnot. But overall, something that you basically that happened that needed to come together overnight. I think it's just incredible. It's a testament, one, to the airplanes, but it's also to the readiness, of the Air Force effort that we're able to, basically build these structures and camps overnight to house these folks and get them moving and everything, because none of that stuff happened on accident at all. It was all not necessarily pre-planned specific for this effort, but we always stand ready for a number of different contingencies, and because of that, I think overall this was a very successful operation. One of the things I can't certainly talk about.
There's also a pandemic going. There's a pandemic
Yes.
going on at the same time. So I don't know what the COVID situation is in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, but that also had to be a huge factor. I don't know how that played into this whole effort.
Yeah, and that's certainly again, not disclose anything that's not talked about publicly, but yeah, people were medical screened and everything. So a concern, because when you're moving 130,000 people, that's you don't want to also contribute to a global pandemic. But I do remember seeing some pictures that were posted on the Air Force page. I read the comment section, which is never a great idea, but I remember some people were like, well, "Where's their mask?" And of course, I'm laughing at that. These folks, are no kidding. They're running for their lives. They're fleeing from their lives, and somebody, on their couch and comfortable in suburbia is like, "Hey, maybe they should have a mask on." I'm like, they got more important things to worry about, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, you participated in something that you can be, that you're proud of for the rest of your life. Couple questions I have for you. Is the Air Force ready now to begin and airlift people out of Texas with the Taliban taking over Austin and the abortion rights? I'm curious if they're prepared to do that. That's my joke of the day.
Yeah, I've seen some good comics with that along those lines of an airlift out of Texas.
Yeah, the Texas airlift. I posted that. Yeah, I mean, it's just an incredible story. I had another thought. I wanted to share some pictures while I'm talking to you because you shared them with me. Here's clearly looking out of the back of, let me see, a C-17, the people lined up. It looks actually quite orderly to me, in a way that I didn't expect, especially when you look at, and then there's this picture here, and you were free to comment on it. But there's inside, yes, a lot of young people. Are their parents with them, or they were separated? How did this happen? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I will make a comment for any JAG person that happens across this interview before you give me grief. These have been cleared by PA, by the way, so I don't want any phone calls saying shared sensitive information, but I did get those pictures cleared. But yes, no, parents we're largely families stay together. So yeah, that was certainly a big concern, is making sure that the family unit stays intact and whatnot. But yeah, what I've been saying too is the journey for the refugees is certainly not over. A lot of them remain in different bases throughout the U.S., waiting for, their final home, if you will. And I know the article came out this week about kind of the breakdown and resettlement. I believe 5,000 or so are headed to California, which I greatly appreciate y'all's effort out there. I think South Carolina, we're getting 150, including 100 are coming directly here to Charleston. I certainly feel state-wise we have the capacity to take a lot more than that. So I don't know how the numbers get divvied up or everything, but yeah, we should start seeing some of our first families arriving here to South Carolina for permanent resettlement here pretty soon. And the folks listed, this is what I would recommend is you put yourself in these folks' shoes for a second. That, for me, my life is here in Charleston, South Carolina. Bill, you're out in California, but can you imagine in the middle of the night, getting the call like, hey, some terrible people have taken over the country. You got to leave. And not only do you have to leave, you have to get on an airplane that maybe you've never flown on an airplane before. Mm-hmm. And you're going to go to a country on the other side of the world that you know absolutely nothing about, and you don't speak the language. And this is where the rest of your life will be. And that's traumatic. My heart breaks for these folks. And I'll say, from our perspective, I've obviously been around, and I was really focused personally on the kind of the care and feeding aspect, not just, shove a bunch of people in a jet type thing, but was going out and buying food and crackers and whatnot, which of course it's hard to get enough for the entire plane, but really wanted to focus on making sure the kids had something to eat, because it is certainly a traumatic experience to go through something like that. The other thing, what little or not, I would say little, obviously most these folks, they knew that America would be the final destination, so of course they knew something about the country and all, but they knew enough that we equals safety, or the Taliban equals potential death for them. So that does give me some comfort. Hopefully the same thing with other veterans, that 130,000 people would at the end raise their hand and say, America, please save me. I want to come to your lands, because your reputation is you will take care of us type thing. And I appreciate that, and I'll still say that we got to make good on that promise, as well as we resettle all the refugees throughout the country.
Here's another picture that I love. This is my favorite. You sitting on the end there with the kids, looking like the great American GI. It's fantastic. I'll post that. Well, my question is, and this is speculative, do you think the Taliban 2.0 might be a little different than the incarnation that you described, before 9/11?
Yeah, it remains to be seen. That's one of the harder ones. I previously described some of the terrible things that they did specific to the bombing, and I think what they're seeking right now is legitimacy in the eyes of the world, knowing that in order to keep that country running, they're going to need international aid. And I'll say, winning the war, that's the easy part. Governing is the hard part. And going back to history, you look at the history of Afghanistan. Very rarely does somebody, either individual or group, control that country for more than 10 years. That's just the nature of the beast. And again, it lends itself largely to geography and a very diverse population. So 10 years seems to kind of be the magic number of where, whether it's a monarch type thing or a coalition, to where they get knocked off and somebody else comes along. And, specific to Kabul, the capital, for the last 20 years, it's been, in terms of Afghanistan, a relatively good life. You still have bombings, don't get me wrong. But in terms of Afghanistan, they've had electricity, they've had a currency that works, they've had markets, they've had education, sewer. So there will certainly be a honeymoon period, but once those things, start to get impacted or go away, people have had a taste of the relative good life, and who knows what happens with that. So I don't think the Taliban can do exactly what they did before and expect to hang around very long. But, in terms of improvements, it's hard to say, because, of course, what you're going to see in the headlines and is certainly a big talking point, is will women be included in the government? And so far, that's been a big no. That hasn't happened. And so, that's probably the biggest thing that's in threat right now is the backslide with women's rights. So I'll say, will they be different? It remains to be seen with them.
I couldn't help but think of my favorite movie of all time, which is Lawrence of Arabia. And then the final scenes of the movie when the British and the Arab Council converge in Damascus to take over. They've expelled the Turk. This is in the years right after or during World War I, I guess. And all of a sudden, the issues at hand are health, sewage, water treatment, and they can't handle it. There's a scene where I forget who it was. They go to a field hospital and there's just absolutely no health care. It's a complete disaster. And just like you said, the challenge of just providing the basic services that make a society run, including vaccinations and all those things, are a challenge. And what I was wondering, with over 100,000 people vacating that country in such a short time, the brain drain that is going to be experienced there, just the lack of expertise in so many of these critical ways. The same thing happened to a certain degree in Iran. When my father had an aneurysm a couple of years ago, it was an Iranian doctor, heart surgeon, who saved his life, who was born in Tehran. So America will be enriched by these people, especially with the food and the restaurants and everything else. But all I could think about was Lawrence of Arabia, those last scenes, and the challenges ahead in that country.
Yeah. Like I said, winning the war is the easy part. Governing is, not so much.
Right. So you must have had some serious jet lag. I don't know, shuttling back and forth from Central Asia. I don't know how many, I assume, I'm just guessing, you can either confirm or not say anything, but shuttling, what is a trip from Germany to Afghanistan? Is that 8 hours, 7 hours, 4 hours? How far is that?
I think, and certainly could talk that because it's not anything, certainly not a military secret or anything like that. But if you're hop on a civilian airliner, you're probably gonna a direct flight, I think, is gonna to Kabul would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 hours, depending on routing and whatnot. You'll probably have a fuel stop along the way.
From Europe.
I'll say
From Europe.
Yeah, from Europe. Yep. But yeah, this lift, just for me personally, it was some of the hardest flying I've done in my life. Just very long days, and passengers require a lot more than a box of food. In terms of making sure they're all right, and coordination and everything, and then just doing it over again, back to back to back to back. So I was certainly the old man with my group, and there were several times where I said, "I'm too old for this. I've been doing this too long." But it was not easy flying. That part is certainly for sure. But that's what we train for. Our maximum duty day, we could fly up to 24 hours, and there was a lot of that going on, which is a long time to be operating a piece of heavy machinery.
Wow. Now I'm trying to think, what were the in-flight movies? I have some recommendations. The Man Who Would Be King.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for that recommendation previously. I really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah,
very much. But yeah, that would be a good one. Trying to think of some other ones. Coming.
Here's one. Gunga Din.
Say that again.
Gunga Din.
I'm not familiar.
Well, this is a movie made in the 30s with Cary Grant, Victor McLaughlin, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Sam Jaffe, directed by the great George Stevens, and it was basically written inspired out of a Rudyard Kipling poem, and it was about these British expeditionary forces in the Hindu Kush, dealing with the mad tribal warriors, and with the Indian sepoys, and it's kind of like it's a colonial romp, I mean, it totally lives within the tradition of the man who would be king, Gunga Din. And they filmed it right here in California in Lone Pine in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada, which did an admirable stand-in for the Himalayas. So I would recommend the Gunga Din and maybe The Kite Runner, which I think was an Afghan movie. I did see it, but I don't remember it more recently. And then Lawrence of Arabia. Those are my in-flight movie recommendations for the Exodus out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I was thinking more in the terms of preparing for the new life, something maybe like Coming to America, a good Eddie Murphy classic.
Yeah, that would be a good movie too. Yeah, the immigration experience in America, a sort of hopeful invitation to a new country. And I pray for those people that there is a hopeful invitation wherever they end up. I could say living in a very beautiful multicultural megalopolis here in Los Angeles, just a short trip down the street, I'm in Thai town. Beyond that, I'm in Koreatown with the beautiful restaurants, the Thai, the little Tokyo, the Japanese, and farther south in the Black communities, the barbecue where I play jazz every week, the little Bangladesh. There's just so much. I mean, my life is so enriched by the immigration experience, and but for the grace of God, my mother herself was born in Berlin and was, as a very little girl, amongst the last to get out of Germany by way of England to America. So I'm hopeful that the inclusive tradition of the United States is, that these people enjoy the benefits of it. And I will also say this. My family, my father, my brother, were in the radio business. And one of the radio stations that we own here in Los Angeles is KIRN, K Iran. And it's the only Farsi commercial radio station that I'm aware of in the United States. We run it. And the Persian community has enriched Los Angeles. I mean, in so many ways, whether it's cuisine, all the doctors, they saved my father's life, when he had his aneurysm, and the subsequent surgeries that were a part of that. So I don't know, just the immigrant experience for me, I just feel within my own family and just otherwise, we're just so, enriched by it, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I mean, we are a melting pot, right? I remember, coming up in elementary school, that was, one of the things we learned is, no one's from here unless you're a Native American. You were not from America. So we all, bring a little bit, to the table, which again, that's kind of the draw, right? If we were looking at specifically some of the European countries that we came from, of people wanted to get out of there because they didn't believe in the class system or the bloodlines, all that kind of stuff. Let's have a country that's free and people can be who they are, and you can have a big diverse mixing of cultures. And certainly these Afghans are the latest chapter of that, which I'm very thankful for. And even I was glad to see that Charleston's receiving 100, because even here, we're a port city. That's our history. And if you go, particularly the historic sector, you're going to see a church of every, including mosque, of every variety out there, because we are a transient, we were a trading town. So you get a little bit of everybody coming through, and then certainly folks selling as well. So I think my city in particular, Charleston, is going to be a good landing spot for 100 Afghan families.
Yeah, and I'll just add this thing too. A lot of Iranians, they go back and they visit Iran today, even though it is an Iranian, it's a harsh regime with an Islamic republic. What that term means is a little bit difficult for me to figure out. They go back, they have relatives. There's already commercial flights in and out of Afghanistan. Maybe the future isn't as apocalyptic as we think. I'm hopeful. We'll see. I just think the absence, for me, I'm speaking my own opinion, the absence of continuous war is a good thing. We had the 100 Years' War in Europe, the 30 Years' War, and now a 20-year war in America. If the United States military can't prevail after 20 years, we shouldn't be there. So I'm glad on that score. I'm grateful for what you have done and what you've participated, and you just re-landed this conversation back to Charleston, which I really loved. It's a place I'd like to visit. And I want to talk about your lessons learned as a politician there. You ran for the 104th district to be in the state house and came up, I guess, a buck short. let's talk about that. That's how we met. And what were your lessons learned as a, I guess, was that your first campaign, your first election?
It was, yeah. If I'll say first one as a candidate, I've certainly helped friends get elected in the past, but first one as a candidate. And, overall, I lost the election, but overall it was a good, I feel like a positive experience because I got out there, my kind of attitude to the campaign is people vote for who they know. So I wanted to meet as many people as I could and talk to them on their terms. And that included, door knocking was, I could say this with 100% confidence. I knocked more doors in South Carolina in 2020 than any other candidate or any individual out there, about 4,600 to be exact. And, it took me somewhere between 6 and 8 months to do all that. But I stood on people's doorsteps to hear about what their concerns were and what they were looking for. And it, specific to the District 114 for the State House, I knew it was going to be a tough challenge. This particular district used to be the Speaker of the House's district, so he drew it for himself. Remained very conservative during the last redistricting in 2010, and then later, about 3 years later, he had to resign for corruption charges. But the district remained. Yeah, exactly. The district remained with the boundaries and everything that he had drawn for himself. So I knew going in, it was going to be a tough challenge. I was running against a QAnon, an open QAnon supporter, which was
that woman is a QAnon supporter.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
wow.
She would never debate, refused to come to any of the debates. Just kind of, she basically sat home and let the district perform the way the district was designed, which is unfortunate, right? So that's the ugly side of politics, the entrenched interest that I was up against. So it was a fight. It was a fight that I lost, but hopefully it's one more crack in the wall to try to, execute, some good change here in South Carolina, particularly with getting our district redrawing process to an independent commission. There's no reason that politicians should draw their own districts. That's totally insane, but we're one of the states that allows that to happen. So, and we're going through the process right now, just like every other state with that. But the biggest thing, I'll say that kind of the takeaway. I'm a Democrat, Democratic candidate for it. I will say, personally, I approach things from a nonpartisan, needs of the people, because I think that's what elected representatives should do. But I truly was not running it against necessarily the opponent. It was more so the national narrative. And I got a lot of, I can't, support you because your party believes in defunding the police. And I'm like, whoa. What? Number one, no, we don't. That's not accurate. But I'll say I'm a military veteran, right? So you can't look at me and say, hey, this military guy is gonna, it was just a lot of nonsense. But we see that every cycle has, untrue headlines, but they are tough to break through. And at first certainly a little bit more on the frustration front, but as time went on, I got better about having that conversation. And like you mentioned, they would outperform the top of the ticket by a little bit. So I was definitely making some progress and peeling those folks off and getting people to split their ticket, but certainly not enough for victory. But overall, it was a great experience. Enjoyed it. I only had one bomb threat against my house. So that's that's in the positive category. I did have a little bit of hate mail arrive, because of course I got accused of being a communist, Marxist or whatever. I'm like, dude, again, like, look at me, man. I'm a patriot. Like, I've served the country the last 15 years.
Tribalism isn't unique to Afghanistan. It's a human problem. I mean, it's not inconceivable that America or the United States we are struggling with a tribalism of a different sort. I always say, yeah, I'm a baseball fan. I'm for the Dodgers no matter what. But in politics, I'm for the values that seem to be in alignment with what I believe. But it feels like the tribalism that we generally associate with our sports teams' allegiance has migrated too powerfully into the politics. Just my opinion. We spoke. You outperformed Joe Biden.
You're right. Humans.
Go ahead.
Humans aren't that different tribalism is a real thing here. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of ways in the national narrative, we're experiencing the worst of it right now, to where we can't come together and form a consensus. And I'll say, I know I mentioned this the other day. I do part of our current divide. It's not one single thing, a number of different factors. But my personal opinion is COVID hasn't helped that because of the isolation. People are getting less contact, with their coworkers, family members, and everything.
Yeah.
So they tend to, stay home and harden. But also, the algorithm part of the equation, when you get on your phone, your Instagram, whatever, and you hit likes, and then you just get put in your bubble and fed the same stuff over and over and over again. And it's created a big problem, to where I didn't even mention yours, certainly my family, where folks you've kind of fallen into that disinformation hole, and that becomes their new reality, and trying to figure out a way out of it it's not easy.
Yeah, there are blessings for the internet, but there's some curses, and the curses is people fall into their own info silos. I mentioned to you earlier, I've just witnessed this up close and personal in my own family, where my sibling has just radical Taliban Shiite anti-vax warrior, with the bomb strapped to her vest. It's like, how do you navigate across that kind of psychic divide? I have not figured it out. What is the COVID situation in first the Charleston area and then in South Carolina? I'm hearing a lot about Mississippi. I'm hearing a lot about Florida. I'm hearing about, Texas, some of these places where they're really, they haven't been able to enforce mandates, and there's a lot of anti-vax sentiment. What's going on in South Carolina? I'm hearing not so much about it.
Yeah, I was actually surprised, because we, unfortunately, for a little while there, I think we were world leaders in terms of population density for our infection rate and everything. So South Carolina as a whole, like I'll say, the Low Country is a little bit more towards the center. We've done a little bit better, but as a state overall, we have certainly struggled on that front, and a big part because of the the disinformation. People getting their news through Facebook, not, actual, medical sources and everything. But also, people take their cues from leadership. Obviously, our governor has not been proactive in the fight. He's kind of taken more of a laissez-faire attitude to, just let COVID happen. So it has been a struggle here. And, one of the things I hear a lot, I was to do a lot of traveling outside of, my military duties and everything. And I go to these other, countries, other states and stuff like that. And people, they do their part. No one likes wearing a mask. I hate wearing a mask. It's terrible, especially on an airplane when I'm sitting there for 6 hours, in the back and, breathing my own air. I hate it. I cannot underscore how much I hate that. But I do it because it's what our country is asking us to do. It's the same way with our parents, grandparents' generation, World War II. It's say, give us your cans, give us your extra bicycles. We need to melt the stuff down, for the war effort. Our country is asking us to take some very, very basic health measures, like simple stuff, wear a mask, get a shot. It doesn't get any easier than that. Yeah. But because of the disinformation machine, and then, of course, the politics, angle to push, with it, we're failing. We're not just as a country, but as a state here, we're failing that test. And I see that as a dereliction of your patriotic duty. I mean, this is the health of your neighbors should concern you, and you should do your part, to help out your family and your neighbors and everything. But unfortunately, I think a lot, and again, we're South Carolina being more of a red state. We're kind of pushing more of that individual message, and then a lot of nonsense about conspiracies and whatnot. But I will say we kind of pivoted. Fortunately, living in the Low Country, I think we're a little bit more serious about it down here, and we do tend to have certain areas with an older population, and with the older, when you get 60 plus, I just thankfully don't run across a lot of people that think it's a bunch of garbage. They're taking their health and their duties serious. But yeah, it's been a struggle here in South Carolina.
Well, America's we can get together when it comes to killing people. We're great. We got all the bombs. We're totally ready. We can kill everybody on the planet. But we didn't have any masks stored. When it comes to saving lives and getting together for, like you say, simple human health needs, it's more challenging. I think this moment, I think under normal, people didn't, smallpox vaccines and polio vaccines didn't seem to be wedges into the body politic in generations past, measles vaccines, all these stuff. But this one, under these circumstances, in this moment, did. And I think people will be parsing and trying to understand that in, going forward. Now, when I was in South Carolina, which I really loved, I stayed in Charleston downtown. I drove all over the state, but there was a big statue for John C. Calhoun, one of the first fathers of the Confederacy, was prominent over the, I guess it's a park right there. But shortly after, it was dismantled and taken down. So it looks like there's the headwinds of history. Maybe there's some changes in South Carolina.
Yeah, and that's again very thankful for the city I live in Charleston. That as of late, I feel like we've been getting things right, and thankfully, I mean, we have I'll say diverse city council. We've got folks that are further out to the right, just some left folks, some centralist folks, but it was a unanimous decision to remove the Calhoun statue, and I'm very proud for the men and women that took that vote and all the folks that made their voices heard during that process, because it was a community conversation. And of course, I showed up to voice my opinion. And, for me personally, that was a very easy decision. Our founding fathers were very clear that all men were created equal. And I say men, of course, women included with that as well. And Calhoun was one of those that he died prior to the Confederacy, but he was advocating for the South to split away, to break up the Union. And his writings and politics were painfully cleared that he wanted to maintain slavery and the oppression of people based on the color of skin, which runs counter to a founding fathers, core principle of this country. So anybody that makes their opinion that clear and espouses, in my opinion, does not deserve a place of honor anywhere. So I was very pleased and happy that we were able to remove the statue. And I'll say too, a lot of folks probably one of the big oppositions, or obviously you're gonna get a lot of nonsense opinions, but one of the ones I heard a lot was, it's gonna hurt tourism, people are gonna start coming here. Well, we just had one of the best tourism years on record. So
Really?
if anybody's still holding on to that argument, yeah, even with COVID, it's been, and again, probably because South Carolina's a little bit slack on as a whole with procedures, but we just had and the year's not complete yet, a gangbusters year when it comes to tourism. So the folks pushing that argument with the Calhoun statue, it turns out doesn't hold a lot of water.
Well, I remember being in Charleston and looking out across the bay to see Fort Sumter and the slave market. And, I'm just a history freak, and to see just the past just reaching right, its fingers reaching right into the present, it's, to me, it was thrilling. Plus just the natural beauty of the place. Now, Charleston is sort of more or less like the New York City. It was not unlike New York City. It was a port city. It is a port city. And so it had a much more kind of, I guess, liberal sort of sentiment than maybe the rest of the interior of South Carolina. But I did hear somewhere, I visited the slave museum there. It was in the slave market rather. And approximately like 90% of African Americans, I don't know if this is, maybe you got to correct me, can trace their ancestry on some level to people coming through the larger port of Charleston from, the Middle Passage. It was,
yeah, you're not too far. I think it's about 60%, and there's really good records. And that's the total amount for enslaved people that were imported, but about 60% of all enslaved folks that came into this country came to the Gadsden Wharf at and downtown Charleston, which is actually now the site. Soon to be open International African American Museum is almost being complete at that very site where over 100 years where enslaved people were brought through there. So I felt like that was, and of course the city, this has been in the works for nearly 30 years, this museum, and our previous mayor, Joe Riley, gets the lion's share of the credit for this. But I think that's a fitting place to tell the African-American story in America is at the site where 60% of imported slaves came through. And some terrible, I'll share one that's pretty awful story that happened right there towards the end of slavery. And this is something that they attempted to bury with time, but it's come to light recently to be talked about in the museum. But one of the warehouses where they would keep enslaved people as they came in, when they basically got the word that, hey, slavery is coming to an end, can't accept imports anymore. I think it's a warehouse of about 140 people or so. They just left locked up, and they all starved and died in that warehouse. They just basically locked them in there and allowed for the folks that were imported to perish because that practice was no longer allowed. So just an absolute terrible story that for a long time was lost with history, but has been rediscovered, and is something that needs to be talked about because, again, that just runs counter to an American founding principle that all men were created equal. And when you do stuff like lock somebody in the warehouse, you put them in bondage, that is counter to an American value.
Well, that's the story of America, is those founding fathers. I didn't mean to say that with the equal. I fucked up, Jefferson. What did I say? I blew it. Did you get the whiteout? Can we delete it? No, we don't have whiteout. It's going to be invented. This contradiction, was right there in black and white from the first days of our nationhood. And that's just the contradiction that we live with to this up until this very moment. Just an aside, the last woman I did a podcast with, Carol Ruth Silver, she was a freedom rider. I'm doing this whole freedom rider series. She was one of the freedom riders, and then she was she was a San Francisco supervisor, and she was an intended victim of Dan White. In other words, Dan White murdered Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk, another supervisor, and he also wanted to murder Carol, but she wasn't there that day, so she lucked out. And then she's led this incredible life. She founded a school for literacy in Afghanistan for young girls. And so during my last conversation with her, all this stuff was going on. You were flying in and out of there, but she was on the phone and on the internet trying to arrange passage for people that worked at her school. I don't know exactly where it is. You asked me that. I should find out. But that didn't end. She's still doing it. So I guess there is some communication and internet and some commercial flights. And I guess it's an effort that, while it's down to a trickle, it is not over. So.
Yeah, hopefully they're able to keep it going. It reminds me of another story from a previous deployment. One of the jobs I actually worked with the Army is we had a contract airdrop, meaning that we would hire, a lot of them were, of course, prior military, but we would hire different flight companies to come in and drop supplies to more difficult places. And my job was basically kind of to oversee and advise on that contract. So occasionally I would go flying with these guys to, make sure they're following the rules, doing what we had asked them to do and everything. But one of the jobs that they were given is they had a girls' school that they would resupply with water in the middle of the country. And the reason they had to do that is because the Taliban kept coming in and poisoning their wells. So this school was deprived of fresh water. So about once a week, these guys would fly over and then throw out a few bundles of bottled water for this girls' school. So many years of struggle, because one of the things people assume that the Taliban's a monolith. It's not. It's a collection of a lot of different militias. Of course, it's got a central I had to say office, but a central core group that oversees it, but it is a collection of a lot of different militias. And what they may say happens, there's going to be a lot in Kabul, may be very different in the countryside, which, needless to say, is a lot harder to police. So again, my heart just breaks for the women and what they're going through over there. But I need to look her up, and would certainly like to learn more about that story.
I'll put her in touch with you if you'd like. Yeah, she's a very interesting woman. We did a really good show, and she's a character. I actually known her years ago because when I was in Berkeley, I was in a film school, and our assignment was to help this unknown political candidate who was running for district attorney with her little media ad, and it was her. I was like 19, and I helped her, and then she lost, and then later, prevailed as a 3-term San Francisco supervisor. Unfortunately, escaped with her life, and she was there during perhaps one of the most calamitous periods in, Bay Area history, with all those murders and all the other stuff. Ed Sutton, man, it's been so cool chatting with you and seeing you and catching up with you. And I'm hopeful that, you're processing your personal story and your life, and also, the larger currents of history that you've experienced and were an eyewitness to. And so I want to wish you the best with that. I hope the outcome for you is, a good one.
I appreciate it. Yeah. And it's, I think that, of course, the book is still pretty, just happened a couple of weeks ago. So the book is still certainly being written. But, at least for me, the silver line is what happened at the end with the humanitarian airlift. I mean, all wars are terrible and awful. And, Afghanistan particularly awful. It's just the, being there for 20 years and the Taliban back in charge again. But I think for a lot of us that were involved, the airlift piece will help us sleep easy at night.
Yeah. I get these stupid messages. Well, yeah, I mean, to process this, I think if you use, I have been fortunate. I have not had a day of combat in my life, except with some of my neighbors who can be aggravating.
Those can get hairy, Bill. Those can get hairy.
And some ex-girlfriends, I've had some combat. The other thing is, I would say, just kind of use the long lens of history to help you. I think that's helpful, because once you get in the drone and you fly up and you look at the larger historical landscape, maybe that'll give you some comfort. I don't know if that's possible, but it's kind of my own view. I went to Vietnam some years back, and I felt responsible in a way, because even though I wasn't there, I was never a soldier. I was too young, and I probably wouldn't have gone. I did feel like responsible for what had happened there, but going there actually helped me, because I realized, God damn, this place is friggin' paradise, man. It's beautiful. The ocean, beaches, great surf. The women are gorgeous. I love their clothing. What's the big deal? Of course.
Yeah, and I've thought of this, similar. I've got Vietnam high. I've tried to go twice last year, but COVID's, they're still shut down due to that. But thought the same is, will there ever be that 30 years, 40 years in the future, that time where veterans can come and find their peace there? And I'll say right now, I'm not very hopeful for that. I don't foresee any ski resorts opening up in around Bagram or anything like that. But who knows what the future holds? But hopefully, for the people, I'm just hopeful for the best, and it won't be like the exact parallel, but hopefully something along those lines.
Yeah, I knew people who were older than me that in the 70s were like kind of hippie travelers, and they a lot of those people went to Afghanistan, and brought back art and had really cool experiences. So I don't know what to say. I'm not a prognosticator, but there's so much that we could talk about, Ed. I want to thank you. Any final thoughts that you want to share, or misconceptions about this airlift? I will say this, Biden was criticized heavily for it, but I think with the long view of history, what was performed was a miraculous mission of mercy. And you deserve a lot of credit for it. So.
And I would say, I'll kind of give a little bit of a kind of expected out. There was a team effort. There's a lot, like a very small cog and a very massive wheel, but it just goes back to going back to high school, realizing that this was my country calling, and just needing to get out there and do something. So it's like I said, silver lining for me at the end of a terrible war, and I think some other folks feel the same way. So and hopefully the leaders, the folks that are making decisions not just today but in the future, pay attention, and we don't do this again, because it's not worth it. We've got there's better things to put our effort as a country than endless wars.
Yeah, well, I'm down with that totally. Ed C. Sutton, pilot, instructor, real estate magnate, future politician, or you are a politician. I wanted to give you an endorsement for whatever office you choose to run for, because whether it's back in the State House at 114 or something else, I want to encourage you. You have something to contribute, and the nation needs you. And I think you're the solution that we seek, your attitude, your point of view going forward, and your experience. So
I appreciate it, Bill. And I'll let you know whenever, service will always be part of our life. So if it's in the elected front, we'll certainly let you know.
Yeah, well, you have my endorsement already. I'm for you, brother. So I want to thank you once again for this. And to the folks listening, I appreciate you hanging with myself and Ed Sutton, recently back from a big time adventure in Afghanistan. And till next time, folks, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that, I mean, nama shaloha. So there you have it. I'm going to press end of recording, but you and I can just stay on so I can say goodbye.